This RealAg Radio episode podcast is brought to you by high-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Tuesday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And, of course, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. We're broadcasting today from Kansas City, Missouri. I'm here for a big convention, for the NAMA convention, which is basically a collection of all the North American agri-marketers coming together in one spot. It always happens here in April, typically in Kansas City. Kansas City, by the way, I've said this before on the show, one of the most underrated cities. If you've never been here before, highly encourage it. It's starting to get a little bit warmer out. A beautiful baseball field where the Royals play. Lots of great food. Love Kansas City, Missouri. And I'm going to be doing a Farm Voice event here this afternoon. Hoping to have some audio from that event today, or from today on tomorrow's show. I'm doing lack of a better term, a fireside chat with Dr. Terry Griffin out of Kansas State University today. Going to be talking a lot about the state of the farm economy through a technology lens. Really looking forward to having Dr. Griffin today on the stage with me. He is one of really North America's experts when it comes to technology adoption and what's driving it, what's enabling it, where the heartaches are, what's being cut back versus what's being added. So we'll maybe have some of that on tomorrow's show for you. Hey, today on the program, we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to be joined by David Przednowek from CN Rail. We're going to talk about how the railways are performing. Less than ideal. We'll get the railways perspective on that with David. We've also got a product spotlight with Bayer Crop Science. I've got some time for some audience emails and texts. You've been sending me a lot of stuff. I want to get some of that on the air. And then we're also going to have an interview with two people from CCIA. We're going to talk about tag retention. We're in the middle of calving season. A lot of people are pulling calves right now. Calves are hitting the ground. We got to make sure we get that tag in appropriately and it stays. That's the key part. There's some things to watch out for in all of that. So if you have any feedback on today's show, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Of course, you can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147, or you can always maybe just find us on social media. Real Agriculture is all over the place on social media. Of course, a lot has happened since we last chatted. So last week, of course, April 2nd, those Trump tariffs dropped. Saturday, the flat 10% was implemented. And then, of course, I think it's tonight. I think it's tonight at midnight. We're going to see the further tariffs implemented. What Trump had called reciprocal, I don't know if we've had a whole debate if we should call them reciprocal, because some of them aren't necessarily reciprocal in nature. They don't necessarily match what the tariffs are of those other countries. There's been a lot of criticism of the formula that was used. I'm not going to get into all that. But what I do know is the stock market has not necessarily liked what they saw Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, the time of recording this. Feeling a little bit better about things. We've hopefully, from an equity perspective in your retirement, whether it's your 401k or RSPs, things are feeling a little bit better here today. What is kind of fascinating to me is China's response. China's response to these tariffs. And what we heard was, I think that the number, we were up to 54%, the U.S. applying tariffs on China. And obviously the President Trump looking for some sort of a deal. Well, China responded, and it's not exactly in a friendly manner. So what Beijing said was the United States' threat to escalate tariffs on China is a mistake on top of a mistake. That's coming from the Ministry of Commerce. And they said, if Mr. Trump follows through, Beijing will resolutely take countermeasures. Quote here from a senior economist for China at the Economist Intelligence Unit said, if the tariffs keep going up and up and up, it becomes a battle of wills and principles rather than economics. Since China already faces a tariff rate in excess of 60%, it doesn't matter if it goes up by 50% or 500%. So we've kind of reached that point where whether it's 50 or it's 104, which it would be, it really doesn't matter, according to this economist. So after 8 years of trade war with the U.S., we've built up a wealth of experience in this struggle. This was a paper out of China. Strong capacity to withstand the pressure. So we've rubber's hitting the road. There's good news and bad news here. Okay? So bad news is an economic war between the two largest economies in the world can't be good. It can't be good. But we knew we were going to get here. This was the prize, so to speak, for President Trump through the campaign and how China sits in his estimation. But a lot of people concerned about China. And agriculture has a lot of reliance on China. You just think about the crop protection ingredients that come out of China that are in products that you're going to be applying to your fields, and trying to kill weeds and keep the plants alive as much as possible. A lot of those ingredients are coming out of China, and that just doesn't change in a season. That's like a 5 to 10 year process to recreate those supply chains. The other part about this, though, is it does maybe help countries like Canada and Mexico. This focus on China, China being this week's bright light, or shiny object is the way I should probably put that. I remember a previous episode of Frontlines with Jacob Shapiro of Bespoke Group, and he talked about the deeper the battle between the U.S. and China, probably the better off it is for Canada and Mexico, because it one takes the focus away from those two countries, but also it brings the U.S. more to like, hey, I kind of need you, Canada and Mexico. And he talked about how if the U.S. was to get some sort of, whether you want to call it a free trade agreement or some sort of buy-sell arrangement between the U.S. and China, not good, probably, for Mexico and Canada. So there's probably a bunch of different ways to look at this. Obviously, we're a little bit early days here in terms of where this goes from here. But I think if you look at the American people in general, there's a lot of support for whether it's a trade war or holding China accountable, however you want to put that. There's a lot of support from a lot of American people on that. Are people happy about what happened over the weekend with the equity drop? No. There was even some large supporters of the Trump administration saying, hey, let's take a 90-day breath here, everybody. Whoa, slow down. It doesn't seem like that is going to be the case. It seems like pedal down. If anything, Trump administration talking to, they're saying over 70 countries to make some sorts of deals. I don't know. That sounds like a company at a trade show where they say, hey, we had a lot of really good conversations. I'm not sure that's a KPI that we want to go on, just how many countries reached out. And the market's not exactly sold on that either. But as the week progresses, we'll get to more and more and provide you with updates and some analysis on what is happening. And maybe we'll get to some of that during the feedback here today on the show. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we've got David Przednowek from CN Rail joining us right after this. We've got some exciting news. We have a new episode of the Pest and Predators podcast that's going to be starting here very shortly. Joined right now to chat all about it, the University of Alberta PhD student, Rachel Pizzante. We've been doing the Pest and Predator podcast for a number of years now, but from your perspective, how would you explain it to the listener?
This is a chance for researchers to share their research, what they've been working on, with a broader audience and with the people who might actually benefit from the research research.
What does the audience have to look forward to in season 6 of Pest and Predators?
Well, my episode, we're going to talk about hoverflies, as well as other beneficial insects that live in field borders surrounding canola fields.
It's kind of fascinating because we talk a lot about getting inside the canopy, and we talk a lot about beneficials. And I think a lot of times we think about the crop, think about the pest, we don't necessarily think about the whole ecosystem. That's the Pest and Predator podcast, powered by WGRF. Those episodes are going to be coming out here very shortly. We'll be talking about them here on RealAgriculture.com.
Every seed starts a story at Alliance Seed. A seed holds the promise of successful harvest each year. From the first day of planting, as your crop grows and navigates the challenges of weather, to the final load from the last field, it all begins with the seed you choose. Trust Alliance Seed to guide your choices by providing the expertise and information needed to match the right seed to your farm's unique potential. Start your success story with cereal and pulse varieties by visiting allianceseed.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Hey, FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in an ever-changing set of conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca and join thousands of Canadian growers who trust FP Genetics to deliver innovative, reliable seed genetics season after season. Experience the next wave with FP Genetics at fpgenetics.ca. Let's talk grain logistics. Who doesn't love chatting about that? Joining us right now is David Przednowek from CN Rail. David, it's great to chat with you again.
Good afternoon. Good to see you again.
Yeah, okay. So I looked at some of the railway performance numbers that the Ag Transport Coalition puts out. Wanted to have a chat with you and get the railway's perspective on how has this grain movement season been progressing. Some of the numbers look a little bit probably less than ideal what you'd like to see.
Yeah, it goes without saying that for folks like you and me who are out on the prairies and lived through February 2025, it was a miserable February. If you take a look at the intensity of the cold we've had this winter, going back to starting a little early in November and then going to February 20th, the frequency of minus 25 or colder days that we've seen from Westman, so say Brandon out to Lloydminster, the frequency of that intense cold is somewhere between the winter of 3 years ago, 21-22, which was pretty bad, and 2013-14. And 2013-14, everybody still remembers that. So yeah. That kind of intensity of cold is hard on all aspects of the supply chain, including railway operations. February was really the toughest from February 2nd through the 19th. CN, as a matter of maintaining safe train operations and per Transport Canada regulations, when you hit ambient trackside temperatures of minus 25 or colder, you need to shorten train lengths to maintain those safe operations. And there was no let up in that period. Again, 3 weeks, we had a lot of minus 40 nights on the prairies, especially in Saskatchewan. That was really ground zero for it. And during that period of time, CN implemented its train length restrictions. We didn't have a let up in that stretch of winter, so it's not like you had a couple of bad nights and then it warms up so you can catch back up. So it was just day after day after day after day of that. And that most certainly impacted our operations and the operations of our customers. We saw grain elevator deliveries in that grain shipment week 27 to 29 period, which was the first 3 weeks of February, drop off by about 35% compared to where they were. Grain was still moving into the primary elevator system, but just like minus 40 is hard on locomotives and people, it's hard on getting trucks started and augers started.
Yep.
And we did see a drop in our performance in February. When we take a look at the grain plan, because I know there's a lot of references made about the grain plan and whether Canada's railways are performing per the grain plan, CN's guidance during winter, when we don't have Thunder Bay as an outlet available for grain movement, which takes a big bite out of the grain supply chain, but also remembering that winter's winter, and of course no two winters are alike. Assuming that everything lines up in a given week, that's to say you have good operating conditions, no major mainline disruptions, no labor disruptions. Our guidance to the industry in front of this harvest was to move 595,000 metric tons of grain per week. In December, we moved 595 on average rate on the nose. In January, it was 602. February, we averaged 504,000 tons, and the low point for that was week 29 when it was the third of those 3 consecutive weeks. We've subsequently rebounded. We averaged about 636,000 tons in March and set a record by a whisker for grain movement in March. But Our order fulfillment was not at all where we wanted it to be in the month of February, given how miserable that cold was and how it impacted all aspects of the supply chain, including CN's performance.
Okay, so just explain that. Record movement, but not meeting the order fulfillment is what, close that gap for us. What's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So when CN measures order fulfillment, we start the week and we take a look at what size of grain, what size of car program, that's to say the number of orders that we can accept based on what's going on in the supply chain in a given week. What size of program do we think we can deliver? So what happens is that we get all of the orders for CN supplied equipment on Tuesday. We have a sense on Tuesday of what's going on and what's happening in the supply chain that's going to either hinder or help overall movement of grain and other commodities. And by the time we get to Friday, we finalize our grain car order program based on what we think the supply chain can handle for that upcoming week. When the orders come in on Tuesday, there's no limit to the number of orders that come in. The demand is the demand, right? And you think about the fact that in February we weren't able to keep up with demand and that the weather was so miserable. So therefore, when the industry measures its car order fulfillment, the orders that were placed in the want week and whether those orders were supplied, there's no top end to the denominator. You know, it could be 7,000 cars. Like there's no way at that time of year you're going to get that type of order fulfillment. Thunder Bay's closed and the like.
Not correlated at all to what's possible. Like it's a detached number from the reality.
Yeah. It can be depending on how strong the demand for grain movement is. And when you get through for each week that's minus 35, minus 40, the overall situation compounds itself, and then you have pent-up demand, so that you'd expect that number is going to be up there, right? And it also depends on what's going on in the market. But the capacity isn't infinite, and we understand that. Everybody understands that, but it's a simple measure. Here's the total number of car orders that were placed, regardless of whether the supply chain could handle them, and were they fulfilled or not. When we measure, we say, okay, we're going to take the program that we finalized on the Friday, the orders that we were able to accept and plan based on what we knew at that time around what we thought the supply chain would handle, and what was our order fulfillment like. And we measure in two ways. One, for the orders that we accepted and planned, not against the roof of the orders, because there could be a difference versus what we received for orders and what we accepted and planned. For those orders that were accepted and planned, what percentage of them were supplied in the want week requested? And two, if they weren't supplied in the want week requested, were they supplied within 1 to 3 days of the end of the want week? So that's to say, okay, if I spotted them on a Monday versus a Sunday, okay, it wasn't supplied in the week requested, but I caught them up. Yeah. So in that period of time, thinking about, the month of February and March, our level of order fulfillment for the orders that were accepted and planned was around 70% for the want week requested. And that's not going to line up with the industry reporting for the reasons that we just talked about. And then for the orders that were either spotted in the week requested or within 1 to 3 days of the want week, the end of that week, it's in the 90s in terms of fulfillment. Look, don't get me wrong. The numbers are not where anybody wants them to be. We went through a miserable February. Did we want to achieve that kind of level of performance? No. Did our network recover quickly in terms of getting our network velocity back? That's to say the average number of miles that a car travels on a given day? Yes. From February 20th into early March, we recovered our velocity back to where we wanted it to be prior to when we had the February miserable weather. Have we sustained that? Have we sustained that velocity through the month of March? Yes. Did we have a big March? Yes. Do we still have a lot of demand to catch up on? Absolutely, because of the weather that we experienced in February. So I think that the level of demand is going to sustain here right through the month of April. Stocks in the primary elevator system around 4.7 million tons. There's a lot of grain that wants to get out of position there and get on rails. We're going to have road bans shortly, and we're going to see the volume of deliveries drop off. But to make it really clear, all that considered, even with February being what it was, our grain volumes are still 11% ahead of last year's crop year to date, and we're on the second fastest pace on record, the fastest being the 2020-21 crop year. So, we have been able to move a hell of a lot of grain this year. We've most certainly had some bumps, and it's not been what we wanted, especially in the month of February. But we got back on the road here and had a big March, and we need to do that again in April to get caught up.
Yeah, appreciate those numbers. Gotta ask you, I think a lot of our audience is wondering how all the talk, some of the trade issues, all the talk about tariffs and how that is impacted. Obviously, we're talking about grain movement here, but the railway's moving a lot of autos and a lot of other stuff, and steel and aluminum as well. How are you working? What does it look like right now as you try to work through this?
Well, I guess it really depends on the day of the week, because as you and I would both agree, this has been a very volatile situation. I think the inference here is really think about the tariffs and the potential retaliatory tariffs going across the border to the United States. We also, of course, a couple of weeks ago had the announcement on the 100% canola meal and canola oil and pea tariffs that were implemented by China. That made for an interesting weekend in terms of trying to move the puzzle pieces around on the board. But what I can say is a couple of things. One, that some rail traffic segments more than others have tried to front load to anticipate what might happen. Might not happen, but not taking any chances. So that's had an impact on cross-border flows again for some commodities more than others. Two, we're staying as close as we can to customers to understand how those changes in flows are going to manifest themselves. For example, are we going to see more east-west flow here? And what does that look like? Or are we going to see the industry adjust, say, for example, in the case of the pace of canola crush? All those things are really important to anticipate and understand what the demand levels are, because it's all about corridor capacity. You got to understand the east flow, the west flow, north-south, and then thinking long-term about how that may have impacts down the road here as we get into the summer and in a new crop. And that's going to be a whole other ballgame. So we're trying to stay as close to it as we can, staying very close with our customers, and just keeping our eyeballs glued to the news to see any potential changes, because goodness knows there's been a lot of them.
Well, I know you're following Real Agriculture very closely for all those updates.
I am.
I know that. We got to wrap up here, but it's fascinating because you also have to think. You have to think ahead, project into the future in terms of what infrastructure is required, east, west, north, south. Like that, you just don't all of a sudden put in more track or more sidings tomorrow because of some sort of thing that changed in the news. That's the kind of real challenge I see for a business like yours.
It is long
correct?
lead times.
Okay,
Two quick examples.
Yep.
You can't just take a bunch of locomotives off a shelf at Walmart and put them into your network. You have long lead times with respect to asset acquisition, maybe 12 to 18 months for locomotives. But from the time you get a person recruited, trained, and familiarized in the territory that they're going to be in, you're talking 9 months. Making big infrastructure investments, which includes environmental considerations and permitting, you're talking about years. So we do a lot of long-term planning. When there are wild shocks up and down, you're absolutely right, Shaun. You cannot just turn on a dime and then flip a switch and think we're just going to boost a whole bunch more volume into a corridor potentially that can't handle it. So as a nation, it's going to be really important. We focus a lot on corridor balance in our grain plan. You can't just shove it all into one particular corridor. To weather this storm, it's going to be important that all export corridors get utilized, including our eastern supply chain. That's going to be very important from a corridor balance perspective as we move forward.
Great stuff. David, really appreciate you joining us here today.
Very good. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
That was David Przednowek with CN Rail, providing the railway's perspective on what's going on with transportation, some of the issues with tariffs, and things like that. Hey, farmers, trusted everything. Genesis Fertilizers is making real progress toward providing reliable, locally produced fertilizer. Join the ownership group and protect your bottom line. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility. We'll be right back here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
Right now, people in agriculture and food are facing challenges that can feel overwhelming. If you need to talk, access the National Farm Crisis Line at 1-866-FARMS-01. That's 1-866-327-6701. It's 24/7 confidential help when you need it. Farm Credit Canada also has tools to support your long-term mental health. Learn more and access the crisis line at fcc.ca/wellness.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcasts. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com, the Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's now time for a product spotlight with Bayer Crop Science. We're joined right now by Annemarie Van Wely, who is the Customer Solutions Agronomist with Bayer out of Ontario. Annemarie, it's great to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so we're going to talk today about Delaro. And Delaro fungicide, it has an outstanding track record when it comes to fighting diseases. Now, Delaro Complete takes that disease-fighting power one step further. It boasts 3 modes of action that work together to combat the toughest diseases. Now, how are these 3 modes of action going to benefit growers in the upcoming 2025 growing season?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Delaro Complete has 3 modes of action. So we started with the 2 actives in Stratego Pro, which we all know and love, which are trifloxystrobin. It's a group 11 that has broad spectrum activity, a long residual, and increased plant health. The second active is prothioconazole, also known by the trade name Proline, which is a group 3 fungicide. Like most triazoles, it has preventative and curative activity, but unlike other triazoles, prothioconazole is very broad spectrum. So when we created Delaro Complete, we added 1 more active, fluopyram, which is a group 7 fungicides and boasts a broad spectrum preventative activity, long residual, and triggers greening effects in the plant that are different from that of trifloxystrobin. So with Delaro Complete, we have 3 active ingredients that provide excellent disease spectrum, preventative activity, systemic movement with 2 of the actives, and plant health greening effects with 2 of the actives. With the 3 actives working together, they're supplementing the strengths of each other, and then we can gain consistency across environments. Having 3 actives allows for more than 1 active to have activity on a disease. So, for example, when we're looking at tar spot, northern corn leaf blight, or white mold, at least 2 of the actives in Delaro Complete are working on the diseases, which enhances the suppression of these diseases in crops. And because the actives all have broad spectrum activity, we're able to have activity on a large range of diseases, no matter what the season brings, because really we never know what diseases are going to be in a field in any given year.
Now, growers are faced with a lot of different challenges throughout any growing season, and 2025, I'm sure, will be no different than that. Now, a couple of the problems that people have faced, tar spot is definitely a concern amongst corn growers. White mold, for sure, a concern when it comes to soybean growers. Can you tell me more about Delaro Complete and how its effectiveness, and just what its effectiveness is in terms of these 2 challenges?
For sure. So tar spot is definitely a big challenge in corn. It's a new kid on the block. It's coming up in conversations with farmers often. It's aggressive, but we're able to control it with Delaro Complete. So there's 2 of the actives in Delaro Complete have activity on tar spot. So there's 2 ways that it's fighting the tar spot spores. Delaro Complete is one of only a couple fungicides on the market listed as having control of tar spot. When spraying Delaro Complete on corn with tar spot, we've consistently seen significant yield increases compared to the untreated check and lower tar spot infection in the canopy. So it's definitely important for farmers to get out and check their fields, scout them for tar spot, and then get Delaro Complete on at the proper timing, which is R1. And then, like you said, in soybeans and edible beans, white mold is a huge issue, and Delaro Complete is the white mold specialist. Stratego Pro was already an awesome white mold product, and then we added fluopyram, which is a mold and mildew specialist. So it's no surprise that Delaro Complete is the market leader on white mold in soybeans. When white mold's present in the crop, we're consistently seeing yield increases in soybeans when Delaro Complete is compared applied compared to the untreated check.
Yeah, I see what you did here with this naming of Delaro Complete. It seems to be a bit of a complete solution. So,
There you go.
how about its effectiveness versus Dawn?
On Dawn, yeah. So in corn, the best and most consistent molecule on the market for gibberella suppression is prothioconazole. So prothioconazole is in Delaro Complete at 100 grams. However, the most consistent suppression of gibberella is at the 200 gram rate of prothioconazole. So we need to add Proline to the tank, which is straight prothioconazole at half the labeled rate to ensure we get suppression of gibberella. Our data consistently shows lower Dawn numbers and higher yield in corn treated with prothioconazole at that 200 gram rate. So if Dawn's a concern for a farmer, I'd highly recommend applying Delaro Complete plus Proline to their corn crop to get the best and most consistent suppression of gibberella ear rot on the market, while also suppressing other corn diseases at the same time. So tar spot and northern corn leaf blight. So you're getting all these diseases with Delaro Complete plus Proline. So yeah, that's
great. Awesome. Well, hey, Annemarie, if somebody wants more information on Delaro Complete, where do they go?
To your Bayer rep, for sure. And or your retailer would have lots of information on Delaro Complete as well.
Great stuff. Yeah, great idea. Walk into your retail and say, hey, I want to hear about Delaro Complete. That's a great way to start any sort of conversation when we're talking about fungicides. Annemarie, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Radio. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, we'll be right back with more here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit Corteva.ca to learn more.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, broadcasting here today from Kansas City. And hey, I want to tell you about CCIA. They've got this online store. They ship RFID approved tags straight to your door. Order online at tags.canadaid.ca or you can call 877-909-2333 for beef cattle tags and pre-approved tags for cervids and goats. So make sure you skip the trip and you go to tags.canadaid.ca. Let's get to some of your feedback, thoughts, and 90% of the feedback has to do with trade and the markets and what does all this look like on the other side of this. We can't really escape it. And lots of thoughts coming in. Got an email here from Norm. He's in Alberta. And he says, hey, this is in regards to my Fortress North America thoughts that we talked about last week on the show, and I got to call him up at RealAgriculture.com. So Norm says, hey, you have a point. Unintended globalization results has fractured multilateral trade deals with bilateral trade deals proliferating. However, point number one, the American view is that a level trading field for U.S. competitors is always tilted in their direction. Two, USA thinks with its pocketbook 99% of the time. Three, in their view of nationalistic exceptionalism, an American is second to no one. Four, Fortress North America means that Canadian fresh water is American fresh water. Five, I'm prepared to concede Canada's trade exports should pay some kind of market access fee to the prosperous American domestic market of 350 million consumers. I just don't know how to do it. And six, if the Americans aren't prepared to honor CUSMA, that's the USMCA, what makes you believe they will honor Fortress North America agreement? Hey, good question, Norm. I think to the last point there, that if I was to tally a lot of the concerns or thoughts about the column on the concern side, I think that's a justifiable concern that I've heard from a lot of people. I know that Ed Fast, former Canadian trade minister under Stephen Harper, I saw he posted on LinkedIn that kind of comment. Why should we rush into a new deal with the United States if they can't honor the last one that we did? And to reality is, you got to ask yourself too, though, the USMCA is sort of what's kind of saved our butt through this flat 10% tariff and additional tariff situation outside of softwood lumber and autos. I understand that. But the goods that are USMCA compliant are still at those zero tariffs and into that trade, that free trade deal. Other questions, and to one more thing about Norm's point there too is I think that's one of the challenges for Canada and Mexico is trusting the fact that, hey, we do a deal with you that is also has a component that's tailored to fighting China. Don't go behind our backs with China. I think that's a big part of it as well. Glenn, who's in British Columbia, says, like everyone, I find the drama exhausting. The worry about our economy, my farm is a lot, and why. Lately, I think the reason for all the drama is simply the deficits the U.S. is running is unsustainable. So is cutting costs and increasing revenue. Doge is cutting costs. Raising revenues for a government must come from taxes. He can tax his population with a direct tax, which would be unpopular, so instead he's instituting tariffs. Sellers are squeezed, taking some of the hit, but the rest is still picked up by American consumers if the price increase. Also unpopular, but he is throwing out all the rhetoric he can to disguise the tax increase on Americans. He is putting on the Macho Man Act to rally American sentiment, and other countries are playing unfairly to put blame on everyone else simply for politics, but the USA needs revenue. He is upfront about this being a revenue stream. It's the most friendly, logical reason I've come up with so far. Usually, it's he's a jerk, blah, 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 ego, self-benefit from knowledge of how his statements affect the markets beforehand also plays into it. So there's Glenn. Yeah, and that's part of the confusion, Glenn, to be honest with you, for a lot of people is, are these tariffs about negotiating or are they about revenue? I think the revenue thing and again, uneducated opinion, I think at the end of the day, we get to some sort of flat 10% tariff across the board for anybody trying to access the U.S. market. That's the revenue side of this equation. The amount above the 10%, that's the negotiating part of this. And that's the one where a lot of people are very concerned because that's created the instability. That's created the uncertainty. Businesses don't know if they're paying a 35% tariff or a 10% tariff, and it could change twice this afternoon. That's the part that the market has been very concerned about. And you heard about at the beginning, China talking about there's really no difference, between 50 or 500. What I have read from some people in the trade arena is there is a difference between 10 and 25, for example. Another email here from Greg, who I don't have time to read the whole email, but Greg was talking about how, hey, the market was down, but you have to sell in order to incur that loss. And that's a very good point. Javier Blas, who wrote a really great book, The World is for Sale, encourage you to check that out. He talked about this morning on Bloomberg Radio about how this volatility that President Trump has created is a dream for commodity traders because volatility brings the opportunity to take positions and be on the right side of it and make some money, whether you're on the short side or the long side. Trouble is, farmers, on the long side, we're holding inventory. And so that's where some of the concern is. So keep your feedback coming. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Hey, Lemkin solitaire and equalizer seeders and planters offer disruptive innovation like vertical banding, dry or liquid onboard fertilizer at great prices. Go to lemkindemo.com for more information and request a demo. I encourage you to do that. It's a great product. Lemkin is like a solid innovator, and they want to get some of these products out into the market, so you can try a demo that is equalizer, seeder, and planter. Go to lemkindemo.com. We're back on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, right after this.
If you're applying a low-rate end stabilizer, you might be falling for a losing strategy. Low-rate products promise great results, but may lack the potency of higher active ingredient concentrations, so great isn't always what you get. Don't put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anval Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Talk about a new campaign that CCIA has rolled out. It's called Retention Matters. Here to chat about it is Paul Laronde, who is the Tag and Technology Manager with CCIA, as well as the past chair of the organization, Lyle Miller. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Awesome. Good.
Yeah, great to chat with you guys. So, Lyle, let's start with you. I guess why the Retention Matters campaign?
Well, we had an open house, I believe it was in 2023 with the CBIC event that was happening in Calgary. And as part of that campaign, we had a couple busload of people come to the CCIA location here in Calgary. And one of the biggest peaks of interest was actually the information that Paul was sharing regarding, tags and proper placement and proper placement and proper applicators and indicators and stuff like that to go with. So there's so that's what kind of kicked it off, as far as us realizing that after 20, nearly 25 years, that there was still lots of questions being going around the table about whether the indicators were getting put in properly and with the proper equipment. So from that, we kicked it off. We kicked off the need to try and keep the tags in if we're putting them in. Just a reminder to the users of what it takes to try and keep those tags in the ears.
So, Paul, let's talk about this. How do we keep more tags in the ears? What are some of the things we need to consider from your standpoint?
Well, we have a list of what are called best practices. So, starting sort of at the beginning, we need to make sure that when you're putting a tag in an animal that it's properly restrained. You don't need its head waving all over the place. You want to be able to focus on the ear and where you're going to put that tag. You got to make sure that you're using the correct applicator device for the tag that you're using. So they're all different. Every manufacturer sells their own applicator. So we have to ensure that the one you're using is proper for the tag, or you're going to have tag losses. We need to follow the manufacturer's directions when we're putting tags in. I've met folks who have been putting tags in for 15, 20 years, and they've been doing it wrong. So, it's there may be subtle differences from tag to tag, manufacturer to manufacturer. So just look at the back of the package, make sure that you're following those specific instructions. We want to make sure that the applicators and the tags are clean and free of debris. So not the ones that have been laying on the ground for a while or whatever. Like, make sure that they're clean and sanitary, because we're putting a hole in the ear. We want it to heal up properly. If possible, and this is best practice, but it's not always possible, but, applying an antiseptic to the tags and the applicators before they go in. So some folks have a bucket with some antiseptic in it. They just dip the applicator with the tags on it before they go in, and they put it on, and there's just enough antiseptic on there to help cut down on bacteria that may cause infections. And again, best practice, if you can wipe off both sides of the ear with some sort of antiseptic solution. And there's going to be folks in the business snickering at that, but I'm just trying to talk about what's the absolute best way to ensure that tags are going to stay in there. Oftentimes, handling animals, by the time they get up to the chute, they're covered in quote unquote debris. So if there's a lot of debris on the ear, there's no sense in just poking a tag, into the ear. Like, at least, clean it off or look at the other ear. But you're just begging for problems if you go forward with that. And although it's tempting, sometimes we lose a tag and there's a pre-made hole there. It's tempting just to line that stud up and just snap that tag in the old hole, but that's not recommended. So the healing of the hole, so once the pin goes through the hole, there's a little wound there, and part of that healing process helps keep that tag in place. A lot of times with that pre-made hole, it's already been healed. You put that stud in, and what happens after a while is, because there's no healing process, the hole will start to elongate and get larger, and then the tag will fall out. So it looks like we're going to do that, but it looks like that's the best way to do it, but it's not. And the last piece is when using plastic tags with the male-female portion, make sure the male portion's at the back of the ear, so it's the flattest part. It's going to lay flat against the ear. I run into folks sometimes who get frustrated with retention. They'll turn that around, or they'll put the female portion on top, and you end up with this big bulky thing sticking off the top. And if you're using a bale feeder and the animal's putting its head in there all the time, it's going to cause problems. So that's part of the manufacturer's instructions, but it's common sense. But like I said, sometimes people get frustrated and they just want to try something else. So the one sort of exception to that is we also have a stainless steel tag, and it's applied differently. So it's applied to the top of the ear. The flat portion's on the top. Again, it's in the manufacturer's instructions on how to do that, but generally plastic tags, the male part goes in the back. So those are sort of the top 10 best practice tips for successful tagging.
Okay, so I like that, top 10 tips. So Lyle, as you've been involved with CCIA for a number of years. You ranch around the Acme area. Is that practical? What Paul's talking about, and how have you been able to use those 10 things that he talked about there and bring them in the actual practicality and fruition on the farm?
Yeah, I can't remember the 10 off the top of my head that we just all said, but I can say that I'm like everybody else probably. I snickered at the disinfectant one, but probably a couple that kind of resonate with me real quick is, whenever I've been to brandings, it seems like there's always, family and kids and sometimes neighbors that maybe haven't been part of a branding before. And the job that we always give them, because, it's dangerous to carry around a needle with vaccines, and it's dangerous to carry a scalp or branding irons, but, a tagger, it's not that dangerous to carry a tagger around. So we always give the newest person to the branding a CCIA tagger and say, please apply these tags. And by the way, we don't read the manufacturer's recommendations in the box when we open it. We just give them the tagger and say, here you go. And we hope the job gets done properly. So that's probably, a big one to me, is making sure that people have the right training to put the applicators in properly. At a job like that, the rest of the ones that that Paul mentioned, the proper applicator, we had, I've been on the board for years and years and years, and I found out at our own feed yard that we were using the wrong applicator to put the tag in, and I'm somebody that should know different, so it makes me wonder how many other people don't have the information if I didn't even have the information. So that's two of, I guess, Paul's 10 that I could mention that hit home with me when we were going through this campaign.
And that training to apply the tag properly, we're not talking about like a half-day course. We're just, make sure you run through the proper steps with that person, and then you're probably good to go. Yeah,
exactly. Right placement, where the button goes versus where does the indicator go. Top side, back side, middle third, where should that tag be? Paul Paul even brought one up when we were filming for the Retention Matters campaign, that with those stainless steel tags, that they needed to go in perpendicular to the ear so that they were in their square, to maintain the right gap control that those tags needed with the applicators. So there's a lot more to it than just putting the tag in, and I would say I did see value in reading what's in the box of the tags, and as we've been putting these indicators in since they came out, and when we read the packaging, I would say I did learn something.
So I guess the question is then, some people may be listening and watching this and being like, okay, so what? Like, so if my retention isn't great, what are the consequences, costs, ramifications? Like, I guess give us the other side of it here. Like, why do we care about this, Paul?
Well, if that animal's going to leave your herd, it's going to go to a different farm or a different facility, by law, by regulation, it needs to have an approved tag on it. And if you don't put it in properly when the animal is tractable and young and you're around the equipment to do it, when it's getting, to be a larger animal and going to go on a truck, now you still got to put a tag in it. So, the risk of getting injured, it goes up. The risk of injuring the animal goes up. Because you're trying to get this tag on as the animal's wandering up the ramp onto the truck. So with respect to traceability, there's three pillars in traceability. One is the ID of the animal, one is the premises ID of the farm, and one is the time date of that location when that animal moves. So if you lose that tag, it's sort of like the license plate on the animal. Everything's linked to that in our database. And you lose the license plate, you've lost any information that you've attached to that. And if you lose that tag because it's put in poorly, and you put in a new one, it's sort of starting fresh, unless you know the number of the last one, and you can call us and say, can you link those two tags together? So putting it in properly the first time, even if it doesn't save you a bit of time, it's going to save the next guy time and effort and hassle in putting in another tag. So it's important. Do it right the first time. Get it done and move forward.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, I appreciate both of you joining us here today, talking about this Retention Matters campaign. All the best to you in the campaign. And if somebody wants more information on the campaign and your list of 10 tips there, Paul, where do they go?
They can call our office at CCIA, so 1-877-909-BEEF, and we have customer service folks that answer the phone who are knowledgeable, and if they don't know the answer, they can get it for that person. So that's your first call out to us as to the campaign, and if they want sort of a refresher on these practical points, that's sort of the first place to call.
Great stuff. Well, hey Lyle, really appreciate you joining us here today, and all the best to you this 2025 season.
Yes, thank you.
And Paul, and Paul, thanks for the insight. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Anytime.
If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio episode, brought to you by hard-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, extended control. It also has activity on lygus and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/CA today.
And welcome to the bonus in the spirit of last night's NCAA college men's final, who was won by Florida. Great, what a game between Florida and Houston. If you missed that, that will make you a basketball fan. Here's something I want to riff on for a second. The NBA sucks. Really sucks. If you like basketball, you're watching college basketball. It is so much more entertaining. That first half last night was outstanding. NBA is just, it's trash compared. It's not the same. Threes. It's boring as heck. So, yeah, that was an awesome game last night. And now all attention is on, finish the college baseball season. Of course, the MLB is going, and we got hockey playoffs. Like, good time to be a sports fan. Indeed. Well, hey, we didn't get to some of the stuff I wanted to on the show today. The whole lack of like just an hour is just, can't get it all in. I cannot get it all in. I really learned a lot during that conversation with CCIA. I didn't realize that there is a lot of people who have been practicing for a very long time, putting tags in incorrectly. So make sure you go back if you missed, or if you listen to the podcast, you would have heard it. But if there's good thing to go back and listen to more of it, and make sure you got some of those tips and check out their website and all that kind of stuff they do in that Retention Matters campaign. Good stuff. Some of you are going to think, hey, listen, you were too easy. You were too easy on Przednowek from CN Rail. I don't know. I just trying to figure out what is going on here, and I really do hope the railways catch up and they make stuff happen, and then we're all caught up by the time we get to the new crop. I'm fascinated by, and one thing I didn't get a chance to ask him about, I just kind of ran out of time, but I wanted to ask him about this whole scenario of where the U.S. is going to put potentially fees on Chinese-made ships or fleets that have Chinese ships in them. That's a lot of them. And the consequences of that, because there's a lot of talk about how shippers and receivers are going to be using other ports. It's going to put a lot of pressure on some of the major U.S. ports, but it's really going to put some pressure on, say, like the Port of Vancouver, for example. And if you get stuff into the Port of Vancouver, then to get it inland, you're either using rail or you're using trucks. So I'm curious as to how they manage that increase in capacity. And, of course, we don't know what that increase in capacity is, so I didn't want to kind of probably premature to get to that topic, but that is something that I'm watching very closely. It also will impact potentially exports, right? So instead of going through the Port of Seattle or the Port of LA, you're maybe moving stuff to the Port of Vancouver to get it out to Asia instead. And what does that mean for some of the other capacity requirements that Canada has? So once again, all of a sudden Canada's, and is there, take that and put that on the Fortress North America lens that we've been talking about. How is that going to be viewed if all these goods are coming in through Canada and leaving through Canada and Mexico instead of coming through U.S. ports? There could be some retaliation and some punishment there. I don't think that just goes over super well with this administration. So stuff to follow, and that's kind of things that I'm thinking about when I'm in a hotel room in Kansas City. Hey, markets today, at the time of doing the recording here, midday on Tuesday, some green on the screen. Soybeans up in response to China saying no thank you, Mr. Trump, which I find a little bit interesting. Corn is kind of flat. We got Chicago wheat kind of flat. Hard red winter wheat slightly down 4, and then we've got spring wheat down 4 as well. Canola up $4.50 a ton. And I want to look at canola here a little bit closer. To one thing we have not talked about this week is the price of canola. And interesting, I'm going to look at fall canola this time for November. So November 25 canola, it has now, we have definitely traded through the range of that gap down. So I'm looking at a $630.30 a ton on the November future on canola. And we've got a contract high, looks like at about 660. Sorry, 52-week range is 675. Yeah, 675. The latest, going back to mid-February 21st, we were at 668. So we're at $50 a ton lower than that. Or sorry, $36 a ton lower than that right now. So now some people say, hey, listen, and Kelvin made this point on Friday. He pointed out the fact that, hey, listen, we filled the gap, but some people believe we would be at that. We would have that $36 a ton. These tariffs have cost us that $30 a ton. We don't really know, but that's what some people are arguing. But it does feel like some of the direct compensation is kind of backed off some of that pressure, the noise, at least what I've been hearing from some of the groups. It feels like it's quieted down here a little bit as that future has come up. Yeah. One thing I didn't ask David Przednowek, because I recorded it last Friday or Thursday, is the fact that we got a new deal. So CN Rail and approximately 6,000 employees who are members of the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference have a new 3-year collective agreement coming out of the labor dispute. They saw both railways shut down in August of 24. So last summer, you'll remember that. Arbitrator William Kaplan announced its decision on April 7th regarding the terms of the new deal for CN workers. The arbitration process is still underway between CPKC and around 3,300 CPKC employees who are also members of the Teamsters Union. The new 3-year deal for Teamsters who work for CN, which includes conductors and coordinators and locomotive engineers, is effective from January 1st, 24 through December 31st of 26. It includes annual wage increases of 3%. It does not require ratification by the union. Company spokesman for CN Rail said, although CN remains disappointed that a negotiated agreement was not reached at the bargaining table, the company is pleased to be moving forward. I don't know enough about the inner workings. I'd have to go back and remember what some of the asks were, but 3% raise kind of sounds like that's a little bit more to the side of the union. But I probably am getting ahead of myself there. But just, it doesn't seem like it. If I remember correctly, there were some bigger amounts that were being requested. Canadian election continues to proceed. A big Polyev rally. I think it was in Edmonton. Huge. Wow. Big numbers coming out. I don't know if it was 10, 12, 15,000 as being described, but definitely getting people out at these big warehouse rallies and people turning out and showing up. Actually, Real Agriculture's Amber Bell was at the rally there last night. So she's got some footage. I think she's going to write a post about it. But yeah, it's interesting listening to a lot of the coverage over the weekend. There seems to be like a lot of like Carney apologizing. Like Carney screws up and it's like, he's new to this and it's okay. And then Polyev does something and it's irritating and it gets blown kind of really out of proportion. People making a big deal about it. At the end of the day, Polyev's got a gap to close. He has a gap to close and popular vote is fairly close. The trouble is the Liberal votes are much more efficient. Like winning a riding in Saskatchewan 90% doesn't really, sure that adds to the popular vote total, but it doesn't win more seats in places like Ontario and Quebec. And it kind of feels like a typical Canadian election where it's Ontario and Quebec. It's Ontario and Quebec. Abacus Data has an interesting, David Coletto, who's been on the show here, he's got an interesting piece out talking about how the Trump factor is not the number one factor for all Canadian voters. This election is about other things as well, and some people are kind of missing the mark on that. Cost of living. That's, I think, honestly, what some people are banking is going to eventually win the Conservatives this election potentially, is that as things calm down with President Trump potentially, and right now we seem like we're a little bit at peace because we've got this USMCA compliance happening and there's other bigger fish to fry like China, like we talked about earlier in the show. But it is that dust kind of settles or there's calm waters there, that may not be good for Carney because then attention turns to other issues like affordability, cost of living, housing, and that's a little bit more, that economic stuff is a little bit more, I think, in Polyev's wheelhouse, so to speak, because he seems a little bit more relatable than Carney does when it comes to affordability. But for example, I was listening to the Hurley Burley podcast on Sunday, and they were talking about how Carney is so relatable to Canadians, certain kinds of Canadians, I think. But that kind of speaks to how Polyev grates on some people, and they don't find him. It's not that they don't find him relatable; they don't find him likable, and so we're confusing their likability and relatability. But very fascinating election. If you think about where we were 6 months ago, where we are today, Fascinating time in Canadian politics indeed. And you can always send me your feedback on any of that. We'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Okay, I gotta go. I gotta go to this Ad Farm Voice event. I'm going to be talking about the state of the agricultural economy and a real lens through ag tech and innovation with Dr. Terry Griffin from Kansas State University. Hoping to have him on the show tomorrow as well. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio.